all accounts, is perhaps the only person who can actually implement this policy. This is a policy that has got pretty widespread acclaim across the spectrum. But a lot of people have pointed out that the devil lies in the details, and how it is implemented will be the real challenge. And as someone who cracked the fodder scam, as someone who served across the country in very difficult positions as well, I think no one perhaps is better qualified to do this than Mr. Khare. Welcome, Mr. Khare. Thank you for joining us. And I have with me Mr. Chawla, the editorial director of the New Indian Express, and Professor Vaidya Subramaniam, VC of Shastra Deemed University. So on a day that the Prime Minister spoke and outlined all the details of the new national education policy as well, really the challenge is that the demographic dividend doesn't turn into a demographic disaster. So what do you think are the top challenges that face the implementation of this policy?
The first and the most important thing about the National Education Policy 2020 would perhaps be to communicate it to people.
Right.
So that whether they are parents or they are young students or the faculty members, I think a very healthy debate, as the Honorable Prime Minister himself said, that a healthy debate has started. People are thinking, they are questioning, they are trying to understand more about it. It's a very good sign. The policy has been acclaimed primarily because it is everybody's policy.
Yes.
Just to add to what was mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister in the morning, more than 2,25,000 suggestions came to us. They were analyzed, sorted out, sent to Dr. Kasturirangan, and with due humility, I must say this policy is the work of Dr. Kasturirangan and his team. It has been made by experts, the best of both the worlds, the ground experience of India with the best practices which are adopted in the world can be seen in this policy. To give a few examples, the multidisciplinarity and multiple entry and exit and academic bank of credit, all these ideas which are there in some of the most well-known universities of the world have been brought here. But at the same time, we are grounded like the autonomous colleges. We want the best practices, but without losing sight of the ground realities. We cannot make 45, I mean, our country has 1,028 plus universities, roughly 154 centrally funded institutions, and 45,000 colleges. Ideally, all colleges should be autonomous, but the practical side is that some of these colleges are very small, and therefore a mid path has been taken. What the Prime Minister said in the morning, that on one side you have a model which is based on governmental control. On the other side, there is a model which thinks autonomy as a sort of entitlement. So the policy has taken a mid path. Those who are good in the sense they have the accreditation of A+ or something, they will be autonomous. Others will have to work towards their autonomy. How are you going to implement it? Definitely, that is an important question to be answered, but we have been working in parallel. While on the one side, the policy was being finalized, various presentations and right up to the proofreading, comma and full stops, they were being corrected. But we were also working on an implementation plan. And as I would like to mention, it will be a gradual implementation plan because we are dealing with students. We are dealing with students who will not be able to change abruptly. It is not a government department that, the easiest thing is what is there in one of the clauses, that Ministry of HRD will be known as Ministry of Education.
Right.
Easy change. But changing from a 10+2 system to 5+3+3+4 system has to be gradual. Change from a 3-year graduation course to a modular multiple entry and exit program will be, it has to be gradual so that students can adapt to this change. We don't want a disruption in the education system. In fact, if I recall correctly, I was, I was in the last batch of the higher secondary, the old 11th system, when this 10+2 system was introduced. For 2-3 years, both the systems, the old system and the new system, worked in parallel because there are students who may not be able to complete their courses.
Mr. Chawla, would you like to step in and ask a question?
Yeah, I just listened to him. It's a very good policy. I've gone through some of it. I have not read the full policy. But the question, when you are saying it's the beginning, implementation is a big problem. When is going to start implementing? Is the policy now for final for implementation, or then some steps have to be cleared in between?
Let me just, you are much senior to me, so I'll just say it's not a big problem, it's a challenge. And just like the challenge is like a pandemic, we have been able to turn into an opportunity for use of technology in learning, teaching and learning. Similarly, we are taking this challenge to the implementation challenge to further fine tune. The policy as such is final. There is no fine tuning required as far as policy is concerned. But various regulations which will come, the new structures which are to be set up, that already we have made out certain plans.
It will be implemented for the next academic session or not?
Yes.
21-22 basically.
Now, policy has various parts. For higher education itself, there are 117 recommendations which are further broken up into sub-recommendations. That is action points. Then for each action point, there are many sub-points. School side also has more than 150 action points. Unlike other sectors which are linear, say maybe drawing a power line or construction of a road, social sector and that to education is not linear. So some things will be implemented from 21. To give a few examples, the academic bank of credit, which is actually a base for the multiple entry and exit programs, that will be tested by December, and before the next academic session, it will be there. The new modular courses for degree programs for central universities, they will come in 2021. State universities and private universities who wish to join the system, because in our country there is tremendous diversity. There are some universities which are already following the type of system which is suggested in the new policy. As the Prime Minister said in the morning, Niti se Raniti, that you first have a strategy, the strategies are there. Raniti se roadmap, that roadmap is also, by and large, the roadmap is clear. The sequence in which we have to go. First, you make the credit bank, then we have the modular courses, then we introduce the 4-year, 3/4-year degree program, allow multiple entry and exit, and then we go to 1-year MA and directly to research. So that sequence roadmap is clear. There is also a suggestion, a very important recommendation to have a single regulator. It's a very basic change that instead of having multiple regulators in the field of higher education, there will be a single regulator. That bill we are drafting by September end, this September. We'll again put it in the public domain because we like the stakeholders, whether they are deemed universities or private universities or state universities, central universities, to give their comments. And then we can have the Higher Education Commission, which is, again, definitely a very challenging thing, but required for the country so that the multiple regulators are reduced. And what is more important is that this regulator that we are talking about, Higher Education Commission, that will be based more on self-disclosures and not on inspection. This has been mentioned clearly in the policy, because right now the system we have is based more on inspection, or rather 100% inspections of all the institutions, and we need to change it to a very transparent and self-disclosure method, but with strict punishment in case there are violations. So this
you mean to say, Mr. Khare, you are suggesting that UGC will be replaced, like UGC is based on utilization certificate, visit of the UGC representative to the university, auditing the accounts, all that takes years to follow, and then the grants are released. You're looking for a regulator which will be self-driven, the people will file voluntary information, and that will be accepted.
You are absolutely correct. We need not inspect what is the size of the building, how many rooms are there. In today's world, with the help of technology, the photographs with the GIS, whatever coordinates can be uploaded. We need not send a team for this purpose. It is not serving much purpose. And if we want to really expand, then that freedom must be there with the educational institution. They should worry more about education and not about inspection. Right now, with my experience, whatever I have in the state and the central government, it is the inspectors, the entire colleges are prepared for the field visit of the inspection team. Instead of that, we should be focusing, not only the colleges, even the new version of UGC would be focusing on how to improve the standard of education.
Throughout the bill, throughout the policy, I thought one lacunae was the absence of public-private partnership. Not enough was said about that, public-private and not-for-profit partnership, which is a critical aspect of education right now.
The public-private partnership that you said,
yes,
that is actually mentioned in the policy. In the chapter on it says curbing commercialization, that while commercialization of education will not be there,
right,
we will encourage, and if there is any surplus which is generated, it can be used in the education sector as a whole. We have not restricted that it has to be used in the same institution. It can be used in the education sector.
But there is still a sense of an adversarial relationship between institutions that are run for profit and so-called institutions that are run not for profit.
I would place it differently.
Right.
Differently. The adversarial relation that you say are the ones, as I was saying earlier, that we have different norms for different institutions.
Right.
So we have a deemed university, a private university, a state university. The policy clearly says that as far as academics are concerned, it will not be guided by the type of administration or governance model. The norms will be same for all institutions. So we will not differentiate that because Central University is an institution run by the central government, so it will have a relaxed norm, and there will be a separate norm for a deemed university that they will not be allowed to open campuses, whereas the central government's universities can have campuses. So the norms will be common. And to that extent, the adversarial relations which are there, that, some sort of I should not be using that word, but the caste system which has emerged.
Yes.
That the heavily funded central institutions are above, then you have the other institutions, and
yes,
for deemed universities, in fact, some of the best universities are included in the category of deemed university.
Yes.
When their degrees are granted, so we get queries from other countries as to whether deemed universities are actually universities or just some sort of an equivalent to a university.
Right, right.
I think, Mr. Khare, I think you have raised a very fundamental issue. That's what I wanted to come back to, deemed university and other university. Professor Vaidya is there, he's a deemed university vice chancellor. Let him pose some questions. What problem does he face, or what questions he has got in mind? Because I don't understand deemed university validity or not.
Yeah, in fact, this is something that we have been longing for a long period of time, that this deeming fiction has created a lot of confusion. Well, of course, the Supreme Court had clearly once stated that it is for the ministry to take a call on that, and then the act can be amended. But anyway, now that the new educational policy is providing a pathway, we hope that this deeming fiction will disappear very soon. Secretary sir, please accept our congratulations on this NEP 2020. In fact, tomorrow, in my article for New Indian Express, I'm calling this as an education pokron because it is mastered a gold mine with a Midas touch. Now, you had mentioned very rightly about the Higher Education Commission of India. And you had pointed very clearly the complexity with which the higher education system is. So, when the bill is being given for public consultation, before the bill, what is your idea on what could be the ideal composition of this commission, given the fact there are so many complexities, states, public institutions, private institutions, industry, civil society. So the HECI, what will be an ideal composition? Because much of the challenge lies in the implementation.
Absolutely. If you see the draft policy and the policy which has finally been approved, in the draft also there was mention that there will be different bodies for higher education. But in the final policy, we had a number of discussions with the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and it has emerged that there will be one body with four different verticals. So instead of four bodies, there is only one body. Why? Because we don't want particularly the private providers or the state governments to go around different regulators, that for technical courses one approaches the AICTE, for accreditation you go to NAAC, for something else you go to the, in fact the teacher education will also be a part of this new body. The NCTE will not be there. It will be all matters relating to higher education except medical and legal. Because medical, the Indian Medical Commission has just been formed, and legal education, because in India, the law schools which have now come up, the National Law University, their chancellors are the chief justices of the High Court where they are located, and visitor is usually the Chief Justice of India. So legal and medical education are not covered by this HECI, but otherwise the entire gamut of teacher education, technical education, professional, MBA, general education. Firstly, because we don't want all these distinctions. When we are ourselves the policy, the base of the policy is multidisciplinarity and free flow from one discipline to another, then these distinctions are artificial, that will go. Regarding,
sorry, please finish.
So one body with four verticals, some of them will have to be specialists of that field. For example, accreditation requires the specialist who can, the academics who can do that work. Some other will require members from the industry if we want to have if we want to take it in a direction which is futuristic, then we do need people who are from the field of who understand the future in terms of the economy, economic growth, in terms of the industrial growth. So those features we will have to bring in while forming the commission. It cannot be just the academic side along with the government officers representing some of the ministry. We'll have to bring in other inputs also. So it will be a little large commission in size, but for the different verticals, they can have different subcommittees. So that when they work in a subcommittee, one could give the example that many a times we have a large body and then the subcommittees do their work and again present their reports to the larger body and they proceed further. So that way the large body will, because the trouble is if you have a very large body, sometimes it becomes dysfunctional.
Yeah,
like some of the what we used to call as court. In many of the old universities, we have a court with something like 60 to 90 members, and they become dysfunctional. They are not able to operate. So it will be of an ideal size, say 15, 20, having representatives from various fields, not only the officials and the say, academic, but we'll have to take the on board.
Broad-based.
Yeah, broad.
It's just a wonderful gift that the school education gives us a feeling that we should now get into schools to enjoy this objectivized assessment and examinations, which is now going to make school education really a fun-based learning. So when learning outcome of students is assessed and the competitive spirit is also getting more objectivized. On the other hand, how are we going to assess the competitiveness of schools now that the student outcome is objectivized? Now, how are we going to objectivize the development of schools, because they also need an instrument to make sure they also are part of this developmental pathway?
Some work on this has already started in the name of PGI, Performance Grade Index, for various states and also for the schools in that state. One of the recommendations in the policy, it is like a fine print that funding will be based on outcomes. So part of the grants which come from the 15th Finance Commission or maybe the later Finance Commission, that will be linked to the performance. So right now the funding is based on per head.
Correct.
That gets replaced. I mean, obviously per head will be required, but some part will also be based on the performance. And that, for example, central institutions, we can assess their performance as to what is their NIRF ranking. It could also be a delta ranking, that how much improvement they have made, because there are, since you are a Vice Chancellor, you will be very well aware, some of the IITs will always be in the first three. Some of the law schools, like IIM Ahmedabad, since the time I studied there till today, it is still considered to be the best. But we will be looking at delta.
Yeah.
What is the improvement which has been made? And part of the funding will be based on that improvement.
Mr. Khare, he didn't ask the question, but I want to ask this question because I see so many advertisements coming every day. Deemed university. When are you going to remove this word deemed? Or it has some logical relevance that you want to distinction between deemed and non-deemed? What is, when you are having a new education policy, let it be free for all. Let it be university.
And I have worked in this sector for a pretty long time. So I'll tell you the historical background.
But will it be removed or not? I am asking that question.
I'm coming to that. Historically, universities are set up either by an act of parliament or by the state legislature.
Yeah.
So this deemed provision comes that those who are not through the act, but through an executive order of the UGC, so they are deemed. So there is a provision in the UGC Act. So there is nothing irregular about about the deemed university. But the new act will be much more clearer that we have university.
Correct.
In fact, even the institutions that we have, like the IITs, as per the policy, they will also have to become multidisciplinary. So,
no, Mr. Khare, you're right. That means the new act, when the UGC disappears, all the acts that also will disappear and replaced by something better. This is a hope because the education policy is much better. What a question I'm asking, do you visualize the minimization of government role in education, higher education particularly? This policy emphasizes on that, minimization of government intervention that?
Absolutely.
And number two, that is, you may answer to both of them. Does it mean all the central universities which are owned and managed by the government of India, they will vanish as an identity of central university? That distinction will also disappear?
I'll answer both questions. In the policy, it has been recommended that universities should have their own board of governors, the type we have for the IIMs. IITs also have, but IIMs are far more, as per the Act, they have far more autonomy. So autonomy at various levels. One is the autonomy for the university. They have their board of governors. They will be more autonomous. Secondly is the autonomy of the colleges within the university. And that is why this concept of affiliated colleges being converted into autonomous colleges, of course, in a phased manner based on their grading. So this role of the government, central, state, is for the funding part. Central universities means we are funding more. Many of the central universities, they also have research projects from Department of Science and Technology or Space Research and all, which is also a very huge amount. Some of them have also formed a company within their university for the startups. So these new models are coming up, and the role of the government will be as a facilitator. Partly we will be funding, part funding could also be from the alumni or from the research projects that they back. But universities must run in an autonomous manner. This is the basic idea which has come in this policy. Colleges should also have less interference from the universities, because my own practical experience has been that while we demand more autonomy, for example, the university will demand autonomy from the government, but they'll be most reluctant to give any power to the college principal. So,
Mr. Khare, I asked you this question specifically because there's so many varieties of universities, like varieties of food products, and you are getting in India, there's the brands of universities, Central University, Deemed University, State University, that university. What I meant when the new policy is coming, it should have removed that distinction where there's no, that university, for example, President of India is visitor of university, calls every year one meeting of chancellor. That kind of, this gives the distinction, okay, these are above everybody else. The president doesn't call all of us university, like Prime Minister today addressed about 1,000 universities. But this president every year as visitor or chancellor of a university, calling some university vice chancellor for a meal or a discussion in Rashtrapati Bhavan. I'm just raising the fundamental questions of Indian education system, because nowhere in the world these kind of distinctions are found. Economic policy, this education policy doesn't address that clearly. Even you are not telling me whether there would be something known as central university in future or not.
No, central universities will continue in future. The question was about their autonomy. So the funding, whether it is centrally funded or state funded, in US, you have Harvard, but you also have the state universities of California, what they call as UCLA, or the University of California at LA or Berkeley. So many of them are state funded. So US also have their state funded university. What is important is distinction in the academic side will not be based on the source of funding. Whether it is privately funded, what we call as private university, or centrally funded or state funded. When you come on the academic side, it does not matter as to what is the source of funding and what is your management.
I asked the question, management question. Will there be a visitor nominee, like the President of India will remain the visitor, as well as the Vice President of India remain something, like JNU, Delhi University, or Allahabad University, all that. I'm talking about the structure of management. Board of Governors, which you're talking about, whether that Board of Governors with autonomy, without anybody from the government being part of that, is that the possibility?
Right now, the possibility is not there. Let us be very clear. What the Honorable Prime Minister said in the morning, you may have noted, it is with me, that there are two schools of thought. This is what he had said. He said that there are two schools of thought.
That's why I asked the question, I heard him.
One is a pure government control, that treating universities as some sort of an office of the government. So you ring up the Vice Chancellor. It's like as if he's part of the government. He's not. The university is autonomous. The other model is autonomy as some sort of entitlement, that everybody is autonomous. The policy has adopted a midway approach. So it is not that they will have autonomy, they will have their board of governors, but that accountability, because they are funded by some source, they will be accountable to whatever source of funding they are. But academically, there will be no distinction based on the system of governance or on the basis of funding. Academically, whether it is deemed university, obviously that word will not be there in the new act. This deemed, I mean, the so-called deemed universities are only in India. So you either have a university or you don't have a university. Those distinctions will not be there. And the
no, Mr. Khare, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, because I have been a member of Academic Council of Delhi University. When you're talking about academic independence, this already exists in Delhi University or any other university. Academic matters are not controlled by by the central government or vice chancellor, visitors or whatever. What confrontation takes place when Delhi University Teachers Association, when the visitor appoints some visitor nominee who is a political person and then selects the professor and whatnot. So that is what the conflict arises. Whether in the new economic policy, is the education policy, is the government, means the central government or the state government, are they willing to give up their powers of appointing people on the governance, non-academic people?
Let me tell you that as far as IIM is concerned, particularly the new Act, IIM Act, all powers have been given to the board. As secretary, I cannot tell the chairman what is to be done or not to be done.
That's what will happen to the universities or not, central university. That's what question I'm asking.
This change has already started. This change has already started from the IIMs. But we will have to have a midway approach. It cannot be two things which I said earlier also. What you said about Delhi University, one conflict is what you are saying about the teachers, and the other conflict I can tell you is that the principals say that they are actually hindered in their work because they have to go to the university administration for every approval. So we must have that autonomy flowing down. It can't be just like we have the autonomy even to the third tier of government, that is the Panchayat Raj. They are also having certain areas are with them through the Finance Commission. Similarly, the university also, while every university authority will like to have the power, they will not like to share it as of now. They don't share it with the principals. So that is the system which we need to replace.
May I just ask an additional question here?
Kaveri, I will ask the last question.
Yeah,
then you
sure.
go ahead.
Yeah.
There's the because Delhi, I'm talking about, there is, the conflict going on between Delhi state government and the colleges.
Right.
College. They're not getting the money because they're saying there are corruption, there are many things. Government is not willing to give the money to the colleges, and teachers are not getting salary. Even Delhi University, other affiliated colleges run by private body. I've been a chairman of a college governing body as well. I know there's hardly autonomy in terms of any appointment or spending the money. So that will change in this policy. I don't find anything there.
It will not only change. Some of the conflicts which are arising are also because of total lack of transparency. Supposing I publish my accounts on the website, that this is what I earned and this is what I spent, then why should Delhi government or any state government object to it? The problem comes because of the lack of transparency. The problem is lack of autonomy, and also we have too many controls without any accountability. So those who are controlling, they are not accountable. Somebody is being held accountable. I mean, those who are, say, today being held accountable in terms of not getting salary or not getting the fund are actually those who have no role in the whole situation. A teacher was teaching, but the accounts had to be submitted by the college principal. If they had done it in a transparent manner, perhaps this entire conflict would not have arisen. So at every stage, autonomy and accountability both will be there, and that too, as the policy says, in a transparent manner.
Yeah, Mr. Khare, I was just, flowing from that point. This comes in the backdrop of a tremendous amount of dissent that we've seen at institutions of excellence, which have been recognized so by various bodies like Jamia and JNU and Hyderabad University. So how do you see the role of the student in such an environment against the backdrop of this policy?
See, firstly, I will distinguish between dissent and dissatisfaction. You and I may disagree, but doesn't mean we are dissatisfied with the present interaction or the conversation. So dissent and dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction partly amongst the youth arises because of the straitjacket type of system that we have.
Yes.
And at least I have this feeling that the new system will encourage students to learn as per their desire. Whatever they wish to learn, not as per their degree requirement. They will be able to learn as per their desire. The discussions have to be there because this type of multidisciplinary education is possible only if there are interactions. I mean, if we have IIT on one side and a let us say, Central University standing next door, but both not interacting with each other, one being a science type institution, the other being an arts type of institution, that will go. And both will be, I mean, students at all levels will have this chance of going for multidisciplinarity. Dissent is is not to be taken as something which is totally against the system.
Hmm.
For example, there will be certain provisions. I've been hearing different voices.
Yes.
When we start implementing, because of their, let us say, the objective conditions which prevail, some of the people may find it difficult to change. Now, their difficulty to change should not be construed as if they are totally dissenting or they are dissatisfied, because the change is inevitable. I'm not talking only of NEP. In the world, when there is a pandemic, the situation has changed. There are, say, 25,000 students who don't want to go for IIT exam. There are 8,50,000 waiting to appear for exam, because I'm getting mails from both the groups.
Yes.
So that type of, we should not treat it as a conflict. It is that different stakeholders have different interests. And the beauty of democracy is to harmonize all of them. And which we have tried to develop in this policy also. There are some who would say, let us have for-profit commercial organization into education. There is another who says that it goes against the very spirit of education, which is a public good. So there is a harmonized construction in the policy that education, being a public good, it should not be commercialized, but reasonable surplus generated can be invested in the education sector.
That was a very punctuated reference about Indian education service in the NEP. So what is the thought process behind the Indian education service? Is it going to be in the lines of IAS, IFS, or is there a separate structure?
This recommendation was made by TSR Subramaniam Committee to have an All India service by the name of Indian Education Service. But this is not in the final policy. This creation of a new All India service is not in the final policy. In fact, Dr. Kasturirangan himself told me that he is not in favor of an Indian education service.
Another bureaucracy. I mean.
One is the bureaucracy. Secondly, if you have noticed, even in Government of India, we are now going more and more for having the experts through lateral entry. Right. I require an expert in technology for education. In fact, we have recently requested for 2 directors who can take forward the education technology project. So we don't require an education service person who, certain organized services are required where you have routine function. Correction of taxes, land records, maintenance of law and order. Those functions require a harmonized all India service or a state service. There are others, for example, in the creative field, since I also look after the information and broadcasting, we cannot have a film service. Now, Indian film service, which will start making films. It is a creative work, it will be done by the creative people. Similarly, education, the education service which is there in the state, I was Director of Primary Education, I think, 21 years ago. Their work was mainly to look after the schools in their area. They were not part of the policy making, and certainly higher education did not have any education service. The new policy also has discarded any idea of the education service.
Mr. Kharaz, since you are a director of education, you must be doing much more. Now you look at the list of ministers in the states. You have Minister for Higher Education, you have Minister for Medical Education, you have Minister for Technical Education, you have Minister for Primary Education. There are 7 ministers in UP government where dealing with the education subject. Hopefully, but you have kept the medical education and law and legal education out of it. I don't know what's the reason, but you gave some explanation. But medical education, the state of medical education in India is very bad. MCI was full of authority. We need doctors, we need better education. Why it has been kept out is because of state politics or not, we don't know.
Because MCI has been replaced by Indian Medical Commission recently. Recently, I mean, I think it is only 3
Yeah,
years.
yeah, after many years it happened. That's right. There are so many corruption
NPI
charges.
itself has been replaced now. That entire concept of Higher Education Commission and Indian Medical Commission are on similar lines. They used to have medical council and dental council, and I don't know how many councils were there for medical education. So they have
Correct.
all been made into one Indian Medical Commission.
The other question, which is a fundamental question rising out of in this education policy, is the kind of policy which has brought it, because Indian universities are known to be some kind of laboratories for politics, for opinion makers, young leaders coming out of it. Your policy seems to be more on the emphasis. You will have less leaders coming out of it, the way it is being structured, or university will become only more academics, more professionally driven, more corporate driven, and the university character will change under this. They will not be the centers of ideology, excellence, the way you have put it, the policy.
Now, let me mention it like this. The new policy, I mean, somehow by leaders, I mean, quote unquote leaders, we have a very different perception in India, as if it reflects only to political leaders, and that too only to a certain type of political leaders who are involved in street action. I mean, leaders are required in all fields. We require leaders in the field of education. We require leaders in the field of, let us say, transforming the non-governmental organizations who are transforming many of the places in the country. So, firstly, leadership will be developed further once you have a multidisciplinary type of education. I know something about economics. I also know about tribal matters of Jharkhand. I would be a better leader. Not the way we always think of a leader as a street fighter or an activist. Overall leader, we will be producing better leaders.
You're talking leaders in terms of professions, not in terms of political or other.
I think thought leaders rather than
thought leaders.
Yeah.
Not only in terms of the entire thought process that people have. You know, if they have an understanding of economics along with the social side, along with technology, I think we'll be producing better leaders, whether political or otherwise. The policy would encourage, I mean, once we say that instead of having a straight jacket learning, if we are focusing on learning and critical thinking, the leaders who come out of our university will be far more equipped.
Mr. Khare, I'll tell you, because half of your cabinet is from Vidyarthi Parishad, and most of the secretaries in the government are from various universities or union and whatnot. And that is a different thing. What I am talking is, the other fear coming out of the policy is that it will lead to elitism in the society. There will be elitist institutions like they are already there. You've got IIT, IIM, and private funded good schools, which are everybody wants to send. By giving more and more autonomy, giving up the central intervention or the government intervention. In India, you will be, as everybody says, there is India and Bharat. This policy is going to encourage more of India rather than Bharat.
I feel it is exactly the other way around. It is exactly the other way around. By having more control with us, we are supporting more elitism. And by having a more decentralized and autonomous approach, it will lead to what you just said, Bharat, rather than having a focus on India. Secondly, if you see the policy, I mean, we don't have much time to discuss, it also lays a tremendous emphasis on equity. In fact, this was discussed at various levels in the government, within the government, and also with the drafting committee, that equity is as important as access. Access, equity, and quality. It should not be that children belonging to weaker sections, it has special provisions for a gender inclusion fund. I mean, for the women, gender inclusion fund. It has a provision for special education zone for the first time. Otherwise, what happens? Supposing a project is approved for a state, there is some contribution from central government, some from the state government. the focus always as an administrator remains around the district headquarters, the state capital. But through the special education zone, we'll be able to focus on those zones which are much lagging behind. Similarly, it was mentioned very clearly about the focus groups, the SEDGs, which include the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward classes. So, in fact, this policy will be reducing elitism, and one of the criticism which is coming is from the elites that we have talked about language, mother tongue and regional language up to class 5. So it is the elitist people who are opposing it, not the other way.
The state governments are all opposing you, the three language formula.
But
Some of the state government is also opposing that.
No, that is Tamil Nadu government has not opposed the policy. They have talked about language, and the minister has already clarified that no language is going to be imposed on anyone.
But sir, may I say that mother tongue issue is actually being looked at as an administrative nightmare, because not everyone's mother tongue will be the same in every class, in every school, in every state. That is the basic issue there.
You see, that issue is being raised more by those who are English speaking. Let me be very clear. And more by those who have little experience of working at the ground level. Since I have worked at that level, let me say there are a number of schools, say in a particular town, let us say a city of Hyderabad will be having a number of schools. You can have some schools which are Urdu medium, because it does have a large Urdu population. You can have other schools which are Telugu medium. And you can also have, because the policy says preferably, so you can have a school which is from a medium much different. To give an example from Jharkhand where I come, the tribal areas say if they have Santhal, they can have Santhali. Some areas will be Hindi, and one area, the Chaibasa Saraikela area, which is adjacent to Odisha, and before, I mean, at the time of independence, it was part of Odisha. The Saraikela Kharsawa area was part of Odisha, and they still have Odia speaking. So they could have Odia. Now, these details, while it appears very complex sitting here, it is easily planned at the district level. You know, it's not so complex when you go to the district level. It is not very complex. I mean,
but the challenge is, of course, to find the teachers who are able to communicate, especially maths and science, in the local languages. That is always a challenge, isn't it?
No. I won't agree on this, because challenge is to ensure that children learn.
Yes.
That is the challenge. You know, once we start teaching a young tribal student who is, say, in grade 2, in, let us say, Hindi or English, the first challenge is to learn the language.
Yes.
And the second challenge is to learn the concept.
Right.
So saying 1 plus 2 is equal to what? Now, what is plus and what is equal?
Yeah.
So I would rather say that this policy is more egalitarian.
Right.
And some of the opposition on these language issues is not the language issue which has been mentioned by Tamil Nadu. That is a different thing.
Yes.
But about removal of English and mother tongue teaching.
Yeah, the first 5.
It is perhaps coming from those who are not tuned to the ground level.
May I ask the last question, Mr. Chawla? Is that okay? Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand the actual formulation of the syllabus, which is where, of course, the biggest amount of conflict will come up, because you will have conflicting ideologies when it comes to drafting of syllabuses, especially for the social sciences. How do you envisage this process? Because this is yet to happen.
Now, this process, the first thing is to have the curriculum framework.
Yes.
First is the framework, then is the syllabus, and the third is the textbook. So, if you have framed the national curriculum framework properly, then the other issues are much easier to tackle. So somehow we start the other way around. That we start with a textbook, and then we find that the because we should know that 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, what is the framework at each level?
Right.
It has to be in a continuum, because if you look from the student point of view, it can't be that, the later 3, you teach concepts which have already been taught in the earlier first 3 years.
Yes.
So the framework will be the most important. If we have got like the policy, if we get it right, the implementation becomes much easier.
Right.
Now over the last, because we were expanding higher education, and I'm not blaming anybody because I've been joint secretary in this very ministry for 7 years. So I have been here, I have been secretary in Jharkhand for both higher and it because of our expansion. And what happened that we kept on adding blocks here and there. This our deemed university that Mr. Chawla was mentioning. So the policy was not conducive. We wanted to add something, so we made out a route that instead of state legislation, you make a deemed university.
Right.
So all these add-ons which are there, now we are looking afresh. So the look afresh, that would solve most of these problems. But the most important thing is if the framework is correct, then the syllabus will be based on that framework and textbook comes as per the syllabus.
Right. One absolutely last question. What kind of young Indian do you see?
You can ask any question. I'm in a hurry. I sit in the office till 10 o'clock. I've become half a journalist because
you're also handling information department, like
so what is the social media response and what is the TV debates going on? All those things keep coming till 10 o'clock in the night. So,
in our case, it goes on till whenever, so it's okay. Sir, but really, I wanted to understand what kind of Indian does this national education policy envisage? What kind of new Indian do you see emerging? Say in the year 2030, when you get someone who's actually been through the entire process.
You see, partly these are my words and partly what the Prime Minister mentioned in the morning.
Right.
An Indian who is grounded in the Indian values and let us say the national priorities, but who has a very progressive and a global outlook. Because this education is not restricted to a particular state or to a country.
Right.
As we go ahead, maybe by 2030, there will be even more mobility. The mobility that we see, I'm not talking only of student mobility, the mobility in general that we are seeing.
Yes.
Even today, the part of the BPO work, which is there in US, is actually being handled back here in India. So these are the type of new paradigms which are coming up. So the persons should be grounded here, but have a vision which is global.
Right. And what are the big careers of the future that this will prepare them for?
The big career would be that instead of seeking jobs, they would be creating jobs. They'll be entrepreneurs. They'll be innovators. because seriously, because right now the system is to do graduation so that you get a job.
Yes.
Or you do BTech so that you get employed. And if you want even better employment, you go and do an MBA.
Right.
So that your package increases. Everybody is looking for package. This system, it will take a few years to get fully implemented, but it will change all this. You work because you like it.
Right.
You work because this is what you wish to contribute, either to the society or to the country or globally.
You mean to say, Mr. Khara, you are saying this education policy will have more job creators than job seekers.
Precisely.
Yeah. And also people who can be flexible within careers. I mean, you can have a career for 10 years and then move to another career. Kind of reskilling and upskilling will take place.
But I can also add one more, that you can have a career during the daytime as an engineer and be a jazz player or a singer in the evening. Because we are not distinguishing between say music and BTech.
Professor
I think
Subramaniam, you want to ask something? Short question, Swami.
Well, will that have a retrospective effect? Because I see the society as an open air university. There are,
Yeah.
skilled people, artisans, and the Prime Minister has talked about India's soft power. Now, how can universities be empowered to provide an academic identity to an existing vocational and artistic ability that the society is so enriched with? They are craving for an academic identity. They don't want to come into the education system. We should give them a certificate. Can you empower us to do that?
The concept of Lok Vidya, which is there in the policy, is in that line of thought. The policy also talks about artists in residence. So a good artist can be invited. I mean, it is slightly further than the Spick-Mackey experiment, which continued over years.
Yes.
So you can have artists in residence. The policy
So
does provide
they can come and teach without a formal degree. Will you allow them to be a teaching faculty, an adjunct faculty? They don't have a degree, but they have enough information to teach the students.
Absolutely. I mean, the entire focus of the new policy, in the national education policy, and the way we will implement it will be on teaching and learning and not on degrees. So a graduate can be a better teacher than a PhD. I mean, this has been my personal experience that many of those who did their PhD, very talented, but when you come to teach an undergraduate, it's a different game altogether. So we will not be so much focused as far as Lok Vidya is concerned or the artists are concerned. It's a question of their abilities and their potential, not about their degrees. It's like a sports person. When we have the sports person, we don't ask them whether you did whether you studied at St. Stephen's or somebody. What is important is that he or she has been an Olympic medalist. So we don't ask a musician as to whether you are from this school or that school.
And that school, correct.
Great. Thank you very much.
If I could add, will be that it will bring a change in the mindset.
Yes.
Mindset today, everybody is tense. Even, I go late, so maybe I'm not, either I'm more tensed in the office and I go late. But even in my family, they keep asking the children, percentage kitna hai?
Yeah.
You got 19 out of 20, how many got 20? These are the type of questions. This is the mindset in every household today.
Yes.
The focus on marks, the focus on degrees, the focus on job prospects. Science पढ़ो, फिर IIT में जाओ, फिर कहीं पे अच्छा पैकेज मिलेगा. This mindset will change. I mean, this policy, the biggest success of this policy will be if we change this mindset. People become innovators, they become entrepreneurs, they become experts in whatever they are doing instead of becoming, as a traditional system, just job seekers having good jobs, good packages.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Khare. Mr. Chawla, any last thought?
No, it's okay. You concluded very well. So that's.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Khare. I think this was a master class in the national education policy. It has cleared a lot of doubts, and I think it was a tremendous public service. Thank you for giving us the time and for ironing out all the details.
I would like to thank you because,
yes,
we want to communicate to the last person. And
right.
all these doubts which are there amongst the parents. Now, I got a call that my child is in grade 5, so will he or she have to relearn the language?
Right.
This type of doubts which are occurring, it really helps. These interactions do help in clearing them.
Yeah, because, naturally parents and teachers are so naturally anxious about their students and children.